Thanks for being here today. Again, my name is Cheryl Andrew. I'm a member of the St. Henry, St. Vincent de Paul Conference. I have the pleasure of talking to you today about the history of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. And I know the first thing everyone's thinking is like, oh my gosh, it's 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday and she wants to talk about history. This is great. But I hope that you all find some of this information fascinating. You're going to learn some new facts that you didn't know. Some of the stuff was already covered in the opening video, so I'm going to skim through some of that information and I'll talk about some other stuff in more detail. So, let me move ahead here. All that being said, that if you feel like you need to stand up, stretch, or go get a cup of coffee, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So stay with me here as we kind of go through this. St. Vincent de Paul Society, as we learned in the opening video, was established by Frederick Ozanam on April 23rd, 1833. It was his 20th birthday. What a thing to do on your 20th birthday, right? And he did it with a group of friends and an adult mentor. And we're going to learn more about that later. Today I'm going to talk to you about 4 people that really helped establish the society, because it goes back further than 1833. 2 of the people are saints, and it's St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac. They did their work in the mid-1600s. And then we have 2 other people that are in the process of being considered for sainthood, and that's Blessed Rosalie Rendu and Blessed Frederick Ozanam. So let's go talk about Vincent. But before I do that, let's provide a little bit of context here. What was France like back in those days? Well, it's around 1600. You see here a picture of the Cathedral of Notre Dame being built. Think about a time where you had kings and queens, knights in armor kind of a thing, and you had a caste system in place where there were, peasants, and this is kind of the environment that Vincent grew up in. He was part of a farm family. There were 5 kids in the family. He showed a lot of intellectual promise at an early age, and his family decided that it would be good for him to go off to school and get a profession and help with the family expenses. He decided he wanted to become a priest. And in those days, priests got, it's not like today, the priests of today. They actually, it was a job, and it was a step up in society because they could earn an income. A lot of them worked for wealthy families at the time. He was ordained at a very early age, the age of 19, and the Catholic Church had rules at that time. You couldn't really become a priest at that age. You were supposed to be like 22 or 25. I can't remember the exact age, but he was very young. So he ended up tutoring for wealthy families. He got to know a lot of people in high society, made a lot of connections. It was said that he went on like one of his religious trips. He ended up getting captured by Barbary pirates, sold into slavery, and he had several different owners over a few-year period of time. He ended up converting one of his owners to Catholicism, and they escaped and went back to Italy. He continued his studies, and then he ended up getting hired by a wealthy family. And so, by all accounts, he had finally reached, where he wanted to be. He wanted to have a good stipend. He could help, pay for his family's expenses and help them out in the long run. But God ended up having other plans for Vincent. And so there's 2 stories that we like to tell during orientation about how he was, converted. The first is when he was working for this wealthy family, he actually went out on visits with the family across their estate, and he was asked to hear the deathbed confession of a peasant during that time, and to receive, I guess, the sacrament of communion. And at that time, he found that the priest really didn't go out to the poor. The poor had to kind of reach out to the priest, and he thought that was backwards, and that was not the way that things should be done. So what he ended up doing when he went back to the main home of the family, he ended up resigning his position with that family, and he decided that he would become a priest at one of these small, rural kind of churches and reach out to the poor in that way. And a second big event that happened to him, as he was learning and interacting with the people of the community, he came across this family that he talked about at church one Sunday. And he told the parishioners, that we have a family in our community that can't take care of themselves right now. Everybody in the family's sick. Nobody can cook. Nobody can clean. Nobody can take care of the farm. And we need to do something to help these people. Well, later in the day, as he was out and about, he saw this steady stream of women coming back from the direction of this house. And, they would make remarks like, "Hey, don't worry, Father, I took care of the family. I brought them some food." And, okay. And then the next person was like, "Oh, don't worry, Father, I helped clean up their house today." And the next one, I cleaned their clothes, so they have clean clothes to wear. And another one, I helped milk the cows. And this kind of went on. And I'm sure he was, elated at the fact that, his church and the women responded to his call for action. And what he realized from all that was that it's not that, the poor suffer from lack of charity. It's a lack of organization. Because he realized, okay, so you took care of them today on Sunday. What's going to happen on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday? Are we going to keep, helping these people to get them back up on their feet? And so he started what was called the confraternities of charity. And it's basically, having the women of the parish get together, get organized on how to address the poor people, the needs of the poor. He went around and he taught that to other parishes, and the confraternities grew to other parishes. And in Paris, it became known as the Ladies of Charity, because it was the rich women in society that went out and actually helped the poor. I want to make sure I'm not skipping anything there. So now I'm going to turn to Louise. And Louise had a very kind of different background from Vincent. She kind of went through bouts of being okay and then in poverty, kind of up and down this kind of little roller coaster in her life. Actually, when she was born 10 years later after Vincent. She didn't know her mother growing up. Her mother died at an early age, and so her father took care of her. He was rich, and he was able to send her off to a nice boarding school where she learned the finer things in life about literature, art, how to sew, those sorts of things, and she knew how to move about in society in that way. But her father ended up getting remarried, and so she was kind of pushed off to the side a little bit, and she ended up, I think what I read was that she ended up living with an aunt, and that she ended up going to a different type of boarding school for girls where she learned how to cook and sew and do the tasks that that we're more familiar with, right? She reached out to a nunnery when she was 19 years old, and she wanted to join a nunnery, but she was not accepted. We don't really know the reason why. Some people say it was poor health, but I don't know. Her spiritual advisor, said, you ought to go ahead and get married, and that be your vocation. And she ended up getting married to a man that had some really good connections in life. He was the secretary to the Queen of France. And so here she was living in high society again, and she was able to get involved with the Ladies of Charity at that point. And she, really sought in that vocation and was very interested in doing that. Things got worse for her. Louise, her husband lost his job when the Queen decided she wanted to overthrow her son, and she ended up getting exiled to another country. So he lost his job, and he ended up getting in poor health, and he died at a relatively, early age. And so she was there, left to take care of herself and their son. But she, had a dream. And in that dream, she was kind of shunned that she would meet a new spiritual advisor and that she would be helping with the poor. And so she kind of hung on to that, and not too long after that, she met Vincent. And she realized that that's the spiritual advisor I saw in my dream. And so she hooked up there with Vincent. They became good friends. And he recognized that she had good organizational skills, and he asked her to take over that Ladies of Charity in Paris. And that organization just grew and grew as the need grew. And Vincent started sending peasant girls to Paris to help out the Ladies of Charity. And one of the things that Louise did was, she taught them how to read and write, and she taught them, about God and service. And a lot of these girls wanted to go on and become nuns themselves. But it ended up that they also wanted to serve the poor, and you couldn't do both at the time. So the nuns lived in cloistered environments, and so she and Vincent collaborated, and they ended up starting the first nunnery for, non-cloistered nunnery for women, and it's called the Daughters of Charity today, and it's still the largest religious order for women in the world. And that takes us over to, so what's happening now? Let's wrap up our story here of Louise and Vincent. Louise is now known as the patroness of social work, based upon all of the great deeds that she did back in the day. And Vincent, he lived to the age of 80. He did work not only with the poor and getting resources for the poor, but he's also known for helping orphans and helping people in times of war and famine. He was well known at his death throughout France. Everyone seemed to know who Vincent was. So now let's skip ahead 200 years. France looks a lot different now. Forget about the kings and the queens, things like that. There's been numerous political revolutions. You had Napoleon, all that stuff going on. There was also an industrial revolution at the time. So a lot of the farms and stuff that you saw back, in the 1600s, people were moving away from that. They were moving into cities. They were working in factories. And a lot of slums kind of grew up in place of the farms. And if you think about it, no running water, sewage problems, cholera outbreaks, no insurance. So if you got sick, if you got hurt, you didn't work, you're not getting paid. You don't have a family farm, so there's no food. So this is kind of the environment that a lot of people lived in during that time in France. So meet Rosalie Rendu. She was actually a daughter of charity after Louise de Marillac. So she grew up in that sort of environment, and she serviced the people in some of the worst areas of Paris, and the Maupetit district is where she spent her time. And they say for 54 years, she basically carried around every day a large basket of bread in one hand and a rosary in the other. And she was out every day in service to the poor, meeting the people, trying to understand their needs. She did a lot of work. She's credited with starting clinics, pharmacies, orphanages, food pantries, clothing consignment shops, all the things that we see today in our own community here in Dayton. This is what this woman did. She is, and one of my favorite things I read about her is people consider her the Mother Teresa of her day. She actually was there. When you think about that, I just cannot think of a better thing to say about someone to be able to do that. Next, we have Frederick Ozanam, and he was born in April 23rd, 1813. He was born in what you would consider probably a wealthy family. His father was a doctor. There were 14 children. He was one of 3 that actually made it to adulthood. His father, he wanted to go to school and go into literature and study literature. His father said, well, maybe you should do something else, and talked him into being a lawyer. So he went to the Sorbonne to study law, and he was, writing articles for newspapers at the age of 16 years old. He had a bunch of friends that he hung out with, And one of the things that they did on Saturdays, they would meet at a newspaper shop, and it's here. It was owned by Emmanuel Bailey. It's a Catholic newspaper organization, and they would just sit around and talk and debate different issues of the time. Some of it political, some of it social, some of it religious. And it was called, Emmanuel Bailey, who was the owner of the newspaper, he started something called the Conference of History. So he would allow these people to have debates on the weekend. And you learned in the video that on one particular weekend, they were challenged. You know, like, okay, we understand that the Catholic Church has done some great things, but what have you done lately? And Frederick didn't really know how to answer that question. So after, that particular meeting, he got together with, his close friends and said, what are we doing? We need to do something. And so they decided, let's go out to the poor, in the spirit of what Vincent had done 200 years earlier. So he started the St. Vincent, or it wasn't called that at the time, it was called the Conference of Charity that first year when he first started it on his birthday, his 20th birthday. And a year later, they changed the name to the St. Vincent de Paul Society. But they asked Emmanuel Bailey to be the first president of the organization as the guys were trying to figure things out. And Emmanuel quickly realized, you guys don't know what the heck you're doing. But I got an idea. I know somebody that you should talk to. And so he put them in touch with Rosalie Rendu. And there's the guys. And Rosalie was happy to have them come to her. She taught them how to go out and talk to the poor, go out and in groups of 2, right? And meet with them face to face, learn how to interact with them, learn how to hear their needs, learn how to pray with them. And they would come back and they would have discussions with her and the group on like what they heard. And they were sharing that information with each other and learning and growing from each other. The popularity of this group grew. Within 2 years, there were 200 people that were part of this organization. And then they quickly realized, well, we can't keep having these small, intimate discussions. What are we going to do? So they decided to break the society into 2 groups. And then Frederick realized, well, if this is probably going to keep growing, what are we going to do? So he decided that he would come up with something called the Rule, which laid out the organization, the principles, the structure of the organization, so it could be kind of consistent across the board. And you're going to learn more about the Rule this afternoon, so I'm not going to go into that now. During that time, Frederick went out and he spread the word about the society throughout France. Not only did he do that, that wasn't his only passion in life. He just to sum up the rest of the things that he did, he died at a really early age, at the age of 40. And I think I've read that they think it was because of tuberculosis is how he died. But he did become a professor of comparative literature. So he went back to one of his passions from an early age. But he wrote a lot, and he talked a lot about the social issues of the time, social justice issues like unions, having fair wages, and talked about child labor, things like that, very much from a Catholic perspective, and he was able to write about those in his social teachings. The society, you saw this information in the video, grew outside of France, it grew to other parts of Europe, it grew to North America, it grew all across the world. In the United States, you heard that the first conference was set up in St. Louis. Now, how did that happen? Well, it ended up that a priest from one of the St. Louis parishes actually went over to Ireland, solved the Rule book, and he took it back to the United States, shared it with the bishop and his associates, and they said, this is a great idea. We should be doing this here. And they asked a man named Moses Linton, who was a parishioner, to form the first society here in the United States. And it took off from there. And here's a picture of the building where they held the first conference. It's right outside, you can see the arches of, in St. Louis right there, right beside the place. And it's grown from there. The St. Vincent de Paul family of associations continue to be in existence today. I did leave out one thing I wanted to say about Vincent. He really did, he kind of restructured how priests did their jobs. It wasn't supposed to be like, hey, let's get money and let's have a station in life. It was really about service to the poor. And so he spent a lot of time having retreats and seminaries and changing the way that, the attitude. And there's a religious order, the Vincentians, are kind of come from the work that he did there. So I'm going to stop there with the history. And Deb, I don't know what the time check is here, if you want to have people break out into groups. But as you're looking at that, just think about how these 4 people came from very different walks of life. They were each called to service to the poor. And everybody had different skills, right, and abilities. And that's the same thing for the people here in this room. We may not be talking about one of us in 100 years on some slides or something like that, but we all, are here to help this society grow and flourish over time with our own skills and abilities. So thank you. And how do you want to do it?
We're right on time. Do you want to see if anyone has any questions?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take any questions that you all might have. Hopefully I can answer them.
It's on page 6.
Oh, I don't have the page.
The care work of the society starts with home visits. It has a circle and arrows pointed in different directions. At the top it says twinning. What is twinning?
Okay, yeah, that was something that Deb was talking about in the last session. So twinning is where, and we've done this a lot at St. Henry. Like if someone, for example, has an electric bill that's $1,500, and there's no way that we can cover like a $1,500 bill, let's say, we would reach out to the district here and say, we have an issue, can you help us? Matching funds, that's what it is. Yep. Okay. Thank you all.